Puerto Rico is a small island with a population of about 3.5 million people, and it's suffering from one of the worst economic crises in the world. The U.S. territory, renowned for its sandy beaches, waterfalls, and mountains, is located in the heart of the Caribbean. But for the last few years, its economy has been in dire trouble, so much so that it's racked up a staggering debt of $70 billion. Now, no longer able to pay its bills, Puerto Rico is looking north to the United States for help. We begin with this report from CCTV's Jim Spellman.
Time is running out on Puerto Rico's economy in crisis. On July 1st, the U.S. territory is due to make a $2 billion payment on outstanding debt. It's money the island simply doesn't have. With little hope for meaningful growth in the Puerto Rican economy, Washington has slowly gotten behind the idea of legislation to help deal with the debt crisis.
The administration has made clear for several months now that any legislation to address the crisis in Puerto Rico must provide a workable and comprehensive restructuring authority with appropriate oversight that respects Puerto Rico's self-governance.
A measure is working its way through the U.S. Congress that would create a 7-member oversight board appointed by the U.S. president. The board would oversee restructuring Puerto Rico's debt and approve its budget. Once the island can again borrow money at reasonable rates and balance its budget for 4 years, the board would be dissolved. Puerto Rico's constitution requires debtors to be paid before other obligations like pensions. Opponents of the deal on the left say it puts bankers before citizens and smacks of U.S. colonialism.
We have got to make it clear to these billionaire hedge fund managers that they cannot have it all. Children in Puerto Rico will not go hungry, will not lose education, will not lose health care to make billionaires even wealthier.
Opponents of the deal on the right call it a bailout, though no U.S. federal government funds would go towards paying down the debt.
We don't want a bailout, and we have not been offered a bailout. What we want is a restructuring process that will not cost the United States anything. We simply need the legal tools that will allow us to confront this crisis and assure that Puerto Rico will have a viable future.
The measure must make it through the U.S. Congress and receive the president's approval before it becomes law. It's not clear if that can happen before the July 1st due date or how long it would take the Oversight Board to begin restructuring the debt. A long-term fix for the Puerto Rican economy won't come easy. The $70 billion of debt has cratered the economy, driving many Puerto Ricans to the U.S. mainland.
Puerto Rico is also dealing with a Zika virus. There are more than 900 confirmed cases there. Fear of the virus is hurting the tourism industry at a time when Puerto Rico needs every dollar it can get. Jim Spellman, CCTV, Washington.
And joining me now via Skype from San Juan is Kenneth McClintock. He is a former Secretary of State of Puerto Rico, and he has served as President of Puerto Rico's Senate. Kenneth, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here with you.
So Puerto Rico is struggling with $70 billion of public debt. That's a lot of money. How did it get to this? What led to this debt crisis?
Well, basically, since Puerto Rico is not a state of the United States, but Puerto Rico's aspirations are U.S.-sized. Since the federal government does not provide as much assistance to Puerto Rico as it provides to the states, whenever we want to build a road, we have to raise sometimes 3 times more money in bonds to build the road than a U.S. state would have to raise. So this is really basically the cost of colonialism, the cost of being a territory of the U.S.
So you're saying now that Puerto Rico is in some kind of murky area. It's not clearly defined what money it kind of gets from the United States, or how much does it raise by itself. It's a territory, it's not a state.
Yeah, it's not really murky. We're a territory. We have been a territory for over 118 years, and the people of Puerto Rico 3 years ago asked to become a state of the Union. Had we been a state, we wouldn't have $69 billion in debt right now.
Right now, Puerto Rico's budget director warned this week that it will not be able to pay its bills and at the same time provide essential services. So this crisis that it is going through right now, what kind of impact is it having on essential services, things like schools, hospitals, healthcare?
Well, first of all, that's not entirely true. The government of Puerto Rico has not gone through the exercise during the past 3 years to identify where the fat is, where are the services that are not essential. Not all services are essential. If that exercise were made, you would be able to cut hundreds of millions of dollars instead of doing what the governor has incredibly done. He has just proposed to the legislature, amidst the crisis, an increase of $624 million in spending for the next fiscal year.
You know, this is making big news across the United States, and we hear some analysts talk of Puerto Rico as being the Greece of the Caribbean, a state, or in your case, a territory that has lost control of its finances. Is that a fair description?
Greece is part of the sovereign financial market. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It does not participate in the worldwide sovereign market. It participates in the domestic municipal bonds market. So it's two different scenarios entirely. And as part of the United States has some responsibility over Puerto Rico. And in fact, they're in the process of exercising that responsibility by approving an imperfect bill, which I support because it's the last straw, although it has a lot of things that I would write differently if I were a member of Congress.
Right, you say the United States is now moving to address some of the problems that Puerto Rico faces. Are you angry that it hasn't happened earlier?
I'm not angry. I think Puerto Rico has not done its job in persuading the United States, and the United States has paid little attention to Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, our Congress does not pay attention to problems until it becomes a crisis. Just take as an example, Franklin Roosevelt started the negotiations on transferring the Panama Canal to Panama. But it wasn't until the late 70s when Jimmy Carter actually signed the treaty that people started forming opinions about that in the U.S. Congress. You know, they don't pay attention to things until things come to a head. Things are coming to a head in Puerto Rico from here to July 1st, and now they're starting to pay attention.
Right, so let's look at what is going to happen right now. What exactly is Puerto Rico looking for from the United States? And what do you think, what kind of help do you think you would get from the United States?
Well, the easiest way to help Puerto Rico is equality. You know, if we are United States citizens, if we pay the full Medicare federal payroll tax, why not give us the same benefits in Medicare when we turn 65? So if you started applying equality under the law to everybody in Puerto Rico, you wouldn't have gotten to the problems that we are now, and we would be able to dig out of those problems much easier. If we were a state of the union, people, corporate folks would not be looking at Puerto Rico as some sort of foreign location that some people compare to Greece. They would be seeing us in the same light that they look at every state of the union, and that would probably result in greater U.S. investment in Puerto Rico. If we were a state, it would be much easier to attract foreign direct investment from foreign countries. The U.S. is the largest recipient of foreign direct investment in the world, but most of that money bypasses Puerto Rico and goes to states of the union that have less linkage with the rest of the world than Puerto Rico, and that have fewer inhabitants than Puerto Rico has. If we were a state, I have no doubt that we would be able to attract more foreign direct investment, and that would turn into jobs, and that would turn into more economic activity for the island.
Now, on July 1st, Puerto Rico is due to make a $2 billion payment on its debt. Is that going to happen?
Puerto Rico could reach an agreement with creditors if Puerto Rico took the steps to demonstrate that it was willing to cut its expenses and that it was willing to assume the fiscal discipline that for the past 3 years it has not assumed.
You know, and I'm wondering what kind of effect this is having on ordinary Puerto Ricans, because as we heard in our report, bankers, debtors have to be paid before pensions can be paid. So is Puerto Rico going to have to put banks before people?
No. Puerto Rico has the resources to handle all of its debts, with bankers, with pensioners, with public employees, with essential services. But it has to enter into discipline. It has to try to repair the credibility that the government has lost during the past 3 years and enter into really good faith negotiations. I will give you an example. The creditors from the Puerto Rico Power Authority, they entered into negotiations with the Power Authority. They helped finance some of the debt service payments that the authority had to do, and they reached a final agreement that will be good for the Power Authority, good for the creditors, but particularly good for Puerto Rico. The same thing that has been done in the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority could be done island-wide if there were the will to enter into good faith negotiations. Wall Street, my impression is that they don't necessarily want to get fully paid on July 1st, but they would be willing to enter into an agreement where they can finance part of that payment if the government of Puerto Rico is willing to be disciplined and be responsible. The government of Puerto Rico is not acting in that fashion at the present time.